Hello, my name's Rod Lawton. I'm Group Reviews Editor for Digital Camera World and Futures Photography magazines. And I'm here today with Andreas Georgiadis from Fujifilm. And he's going to be telling us about the new XF50mm F1.0 lens. And a bit about the X-T4, we hope, and anything else you can tell us.
Yeah, sure.
So,
afternoon, Rod.
Afternoon. Just a bit of general housekeeping. You can ask a question at any time, and can use the Q&A panel for that, please. And we'll answer them as we go along, if possible, but if not, at the end. But over to you, Andreas.
Afternoon, everyone. So, as Rod says, I primarily want to talk to you about this stunning bit of glass, the 50mm F1, and it is the first autofocus F1 lens made for mirrorless cameras. I know that a lot of people have been saying there's been a real big rise in terms of fast aperture lenses, and this is our entry into this fast aperture lens category. The first thing to point out is obviously its aperture. It's very, very creamy, soft, smooth bokeh that you get at F1. The 35mm equivalent is 75 millimeters. So it makes it a very nice short telephoto lens for portraiture primarily. So we expect a lot of wedding, portrait photographers, studio photographers to use this. And actually, when balanced on the X-T4, it's not too big and heavy, which is the concern when you deal with these big, large aperture lenses. So in terms of tech specs, it's weather sealed, has that F1 aperture, which gives us that creamy bokeh. A lot of people have been asking us, well, hang on a minute, you've got the 56mm F1.2. What am I getting for that extra half stop? You're getting slightly quicker focusing, you're getting that extra background separation. But the important thing from our lens manufacturer point of view is we give things a little bit of magic. So it's not a clinical sharp lens. So we've left a little bit of the spherical aberrations in there at F1 to give it the smoother bokeh. But for us, it's a very, very exciting product that we announced. It was actually about this time last year that we announced the 50mm. We had originally had a 33mm on the roadmap, but when our lens designers started making it, they realized it was going to be far too heavy, need its own tripod collar and things like that. So they quickly did a quick poll of our ex-photographers, and the popularity for a short telephoto portrait lens was off the scale. So they switched the focal length. In terms of pricing, a very reasonable price, £14.99. And it's available as of next week, as of the 24th, but you can pre-order it now. So 50mm F1, huge bit of glass. But then, as you say, we're here to talk about the X-T4, which we announced earlier this year and released during lockdown times. So uses the traditional styling that we first saw on X-T1. So with your ISO dial, your shutter dial, your exposure compensation. It's got a bigger grip to it, partly because we're housing a bigger battery, which is always the complaint around mirrorless cameras, that the battery life isn't as good as DSLRs. But we've done that. We've integrated a bigger battery. We've got a fully articulating vari-angle screen, which I think is Marmite in the photography world. You get people who love them and you get people who hate them. But they are much more versatile for both stills and video photography. So you've got that as an option. And then in terms of the inside of the camera, it uses our X-Trans4 sensor. It uses our X-Processor 4. Really super fast autofocus, super low light. I mean, with the 50mm F1, we can focus down to -7 EV in terms of how much available light there is, which makes this a low light king in the mirrorless world. And then other things that you'd expect from Fujifilm, it's got a super quiet shutter. So I don't know if you can pick this up. Can you hear that? That's the mechanical shutter. It's much, much quieter. We launched a quiet shutter when we announced the XH1 a few years back. We've actually made it even quieter still. The big thing from the X-T4 versus the rest of the X-T range, it's the first X-T camera to have in-body image stabilization, which is 6.5 stops, depending upon what lens you've got on it. So very complete package, in-body stabilization, vari-angle screen, 4K 60p movie shooting. I mean, the list of specifications go on, and it really is the flagship APS-C camera that we make. And I mean, it's a joy to use. It's been my camera of choice now for about 3 months. And my daughter is fed up of me pointing the camera and actually the 50mm at her, but I'm not fed up of seeing the results. They really are magical and encouraging to just carry on taking more and more pictures.
It's interesting what you say about the 50mm f1. I used it for a short time, and it struck me then that it has a very different look to other fast lenses I've used. And you mentioned that's because the designers have deliberately left in some spherical aberration at f1. Could you explain that a little bit more and the look they were trying to achieve, which does seem to me to be quite different?
Yeah, so obviously with any sort of lens design, you can make a lens clinically sharp, for example, but it might lose some character, and it's what our lenses have been known for in terms of having a little bit of character. So the 35mm f1.4 is known for having that sort of like magic in inverted commas. And what the designers decided to do with the 50mm f1 is they decided to leave, as you said, some spherical aberrations in at f1. And as you stop down, you get different characteristics in terms of resolution and things like that. But we wanted it to look smooth and creamy is the description. And it's very strange to use like words like that when you're describing something which is ultimately a precision bit of engineering. But they wanted to allow almost some art to come out of the lens, and it not just be a very clinical, pure resolution beast at f1. That's not to say the lens isn't sharp. It's stunningly sharp at f1, but it is designed with it to give a certain character.
It did certainly strike me that way, because every shot I took, I ended up shooting an f1 because I liked it so much. And it's noticeable the way the sharpness falls away in a very gentle way. It reminded me of certain Leica lenses.
Yeah, it definitely has a look and a character, and I've got no concerns from a marketing perspective using that terminology, but it gives you a feel that you wouldn't sort of like expect to see. Some manufacturers go very, very clinical in terms of the absolute resolution or sort of like the look that it gives you, but this is a more without sounding marketing, a bit more emotive in terms of the look that it gives you. And as you say, it encourages you to shoot at f1. The thing about shooting at f1 is it can be very unforgiving. And obviously having the face and eye detection, the super fast face and eye detection that you do on something like the T4, it encourages you to shoot wide open because you can use it quickly and it can track faces and eyes very, very well. So it's a great partnership being able to do that.
I imagine the autofocus is very important to you as well, because when you have such a fast lens, such a shallow depth of field, manual focus isn't necessarily up to the job, is it? You do need the speed and accuracy of AF sometimes.
I think in order to make the most of the lens and to enjoy it to its full, autofocus really comes into its own. Let's not say that fast manual focus lenses haven't got a place in the world. Of course they do, but I think that you don't get disheartened as much using this lens with the autofocus because it's more hit than it is miss at f1. So definitely from my experience using older manual focus fast aperture primes, it becomes almost frustrating to the point maybe I'm not as good as other people in terms of focusing those fast lenses. But I don't like to say I'm cheating, but it definitely feels like that when you're getting these sort of like these emotive cinematic looking images out of an F1 lens very, very easily and very quickly. When you've got things like the fast autofocus and the T4, you've got the face and eye detection, and you're sort of like just cheating. It's like fishing with dynamite.
Do you feel that prime lenses are becoming ever more popular?
From our sales, you'd see that actually the zoom lenses are still by far the more popular lenses that we sell, but prime lenses personally have a place in my kit bag anyway, and I always grab a prime versus a zoom more often than not. So we've seen a popularity in prime lenses, and you'll see in our range actually we have more prime lenses than we do zooms. But actually, when customers actually go to buy, people are still buying into like definitely the fast f2.8 lenses and the ultra wides and things like that. It's always the compromise, the convenience versus the quality. But the 50mm f1 is definitely got a place in my camera bag.
And I think another thing that struck me was that the maximum apertures of prime lenses are slowly creeping up in a way that perhaps we don't notice. And when I was using the XF50mm, I realized that f4 was actually halfway through the aperture range. And I had another 3 stops more than that. So that's 2.8 to 1.41. 4? I can't count that. But that, it struck me that this gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of exposure and depth of field.
Yeah, it's sort of like we're definitely in sort of like a speed race as it is, and we see from other manufacturers as well the sort of like the recent launches of f1.2 lenses and things like that, and we see that there's definitely a demand to get the creamier bokeh, the sort of like the better background separation, and it does feel like a speed race with other camera manufacturers, but as you say, the versatility that offers you, especially in low light, because don't forget, when these cameras autofocus, they're actually using the maximum aperture in order to do that. So while you might have it set to 2.8 when it's autofocusing, the camera actually utilizes the fact that it's an f1 lens, hence why it can focus down to -7 EV. Previous best was -6 EV because all the testing was done on a f1.4 lens. So that definitely helps people in terms of their low light photography, even if they're not planning to use it at its maximum aperture.
Okay, so perhaps if we talk about the X-T4 for a few minutes, if that's okay. I noticed the X-T3 is still on sale. Is that likely to carry on for a while?
Yeah, we've got no current plans to discontinue the X-T3. The X-T3 fits in the range very, very well and comfortably side by side with the X-T4. We've got clearly for more, the X-T4 having the in-body stabilization, the bigger battery, the vari-angle screen, and slightly upgraded movie functionality sits obviously above the T3, but lends itself more to video shooters and the sort of like the ultimate hybrid camera. But the X-T3 has got a firm place in the heart of a lot of stills and video photographers for those that don't need IBIS. I mean, ultimately, if a camera was on a tripod or if a camera was on a gimbal, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a T3 and a T4 in terms of the photographic or the video quality. Obviously, there are other benefits as well, like the bigger battery, the quieter shutter mechanism, the faster frames per second. But to a lot of people, these are very incremental. And for someone, say, shooting landscapes, when the majority of the time the camera will be on a tripod, they go, actually, the T3 is going to be more than adequate for what they need. And some of the prices on the T3 now make it an absolute bargain.
I think so. I think so. Another thing you said interested me, and that was that vari-angle screens or flip-out screens are controversial. That quite surprised me. Can you say a bit more about that? Do some people prefer the flip screen, the ones that flip up and down?
I mean, the thing is, frustratingly, it's impossible to make the perfect camera for absolutely everyone. And when we launched the X-T3, the first comments that we had from reviewers such as yourself were, not specifically yourself, but reviewers were, shame it doesn't have a vari-angle screen, because at the time we had upgraded the video functionality a lot, and a lot of people felt that it would made a perfect vlogging camera, so ability to see yourself. Now, vari-angle screens are not just about vlogging. For me, the thing I like most about the vari-angle screen is being able to flip it back and actually protect the screen when I'm not using it. And that's the feature that I love the most. But I find that if I'm low down, obviously I can shoot like that. And the biggest complaint that we've had from people is that it increases the footprint of the width when people want to shoot low down and things like that. But we feel that the benefits outweigh the negatives, as it were, of shooting with sort of like a three-way tilt screen that we had on so like the X-T3, or the vari-angle screen that we've got on the X-T4. But ultimately, if somebody wants the vari-angle screen, then there still is the X-T3 available. If we had released the X-T4, for example, with a vari-angle with a three-way tilt, there would have been people complaining it's not a vari-angle screen. So photography is a beautiful industry, full of characters, and we love how opinionated everyone is and how passionate they are about their hobby and their profession. So we just enjoy the conversation and just welcome all the comments.
So if I'm right, the video specs of the X-T4 are quite similar to the X-T3.
Yeah.
So the main difference is probably the autofocus and the screen. And
it's obviously the autofocus, it's the screen, and you've got because the in-body stabilization, you've also got the digital image stabilization on the X-T4. So if you are hand-holding the camera, also not on a gimbal, on sort of like a small tripod or something like that, and walking, the X-T4 will give you a much smoother, much cleaner video than something like the X-T3. If you had obviously a big rig with a gimbal and things like that, and then the X-T3 would function because you've got the stabilization from another source very, very well. So that's the major difference that I'd say is between the two. The additional, the other addition, which a lot of videographers are thankful for, is the ability to run a backup. So because you've got two SD card slots, you can back up recording onto both SD cards on the X-T4, whereas you can't with the T3.
So we are seeing quite an acceleration in video specifications this year. Do you think we've reached a point where the cameras do everything that's possible, or do you think there's more scope yet for example, higher resolutions, high bit depths, raw recording internally?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, as you said, there's been some major advances from other camera manufacturers in terms of the video recording, but ultimately it comes down to what's usable as well, because it's all well and good having flagship specifications, but if they're not usable, if they're not real world specifications that people use, then it's probably not worth it. I mean, if you think about it, our terrestrial channels, most of them still aren't even transmitted in full HD, so like through the box, through the aerial. So we need to be mindful about actually what customers are using, not just what they think they want. So do I envisage a time where we'll see higher resolution video? Yes, of course. I've given up saying never to these sorts of advancements, because consumer electronics as an industry is fueled by these sorts of this desire to get better quality. So like high resolution, we've seen that in TVs and so like audio and loads of other industries. So photography is not different. Do I think it's necessary from a consumer perspective? Probably not. Most modern computers will probably struggle with 8K video currently. So unless computing technology of consumer grade updates itself to get to a stage where actually Joe Public can use and edit that video, then it's all about that usability as well. So right now, 4K is more than good enough for the majority of applications. 4K 60p, great. Maybe we'll go for higher frame rates, who knows? in the state of 4K. I'm not sure.
How do you feel the market is split at the moment? The people who buy Fujifilm cameras, do you think they're mostly photographers? Are they half videographers, or is it constantly changing?
It's definitely moved. Since we launched the X-T3, the goalposts have moved massively. When we look at the customer data and we see the main reasons why customers are buying into Fujifilm cameras, it's mainly because they want to shoot landscapes, mainly want to shoot street photography, for the excellent film simulations, the black and white modes, and they tend to be the reasons why. But because of our long-standing heritage in the cinema lens industry, what we see is people now are taking notice of our hybrid cameras, X-T3, X-T4, and even the GFX 100 offering ProRes support recently. We've seen a lot of DPs knock on our door and say, actually, can I shoot something with your GFX 100? And then the conversation starts, and then they realize, actually, I can get a lot of what I need out of an X-T4, where they didn't need to have a bigger camera than they used to. So I would say that probably the split now is 70-30, whereas if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, it would have been 95 or 99-1 sort of thing. So it's massively accelerated for us in terms of Fujifilm acceptance in the video industry, and what we see people buying our cameras for. And some of the emails I receive are all about they want to use us for their YouTube channels, they want to use us for shooting videos, feature films, cinematographers, and things like that.
So at the moment, we're hearing quite a lot about recording limits.
Yeah.
Now, I'm aware that in some instances, that is a kind of a licensing legislation restriction, what the products are classed as. But we're hearing a lot more these days about heat buildup.
Yeah.
So perhaps you can tell us about these and why there are recording limits.
Yeah, so you mentioned obviously the EU legislation about classification of cameras, and I think the EU gave up that legislation back in 2019, in July 2019. So cameras launched after that don't have to be classified as stills or video cameras. So that extra duty that used to be applied for video cameras, for stills cameras that could shoot more than 29 minutes and 56 seconds, doesn't exist anymore. So we don't have that issue. It's purely down to heat generation. And if you can imagine that we've got two conflicting demands. We've got the demands of a stills photographer who wants to have as small and light a mirrorless camera as possible. And then you've got the demands of a videographer who will say, actually, while the dimensions are important for size and weight, what's more important to me is have that additional recording time. Now, as you're running the sensor constantly, the sensor's on, and obviously the electricity going through it builds up heat. So you need to have bigger cameras in order to dissipate that heat, and bigger heat sinks and things like that. So something like the GFX 100 has got a maximum recording time of an hour. Although the sensor is 4 times bigger than the APS-C sensor, you'd think the heat generated is more. Well, actually, because the camera is bigger and you've got a bigger heat sink available to you, you can get away with pushing the recording time further. Now, something like the X-T4, which you need to remember in this small package, we've got the 6.5 stop stabilization, we've got the battery, which will sit there, we've got the screen. So actually,